Max was a boy who loved to be wild. He wore a furry wolf costume. Max would roar and howl, chasing the family dog, Skipper. Max's imagination knew no bounds. One day, Max's wildness reached a fever pitch. He growled and snarled, his imagination transforming their cozy home into a wild jungle. Max, caught in a whirlwind of excitement, grabbed a fork from the kitchen. He chased Skipper, the poor dog yelping as he ran. Max, in his mind, wasn't just Max anymore. He was a fierce predator stalking his prey. "Max!" his mother exclaimed, her voice sharp. Max, startled, stopped his antics and turned to face her.
Shush!
Max's mother, her patience wearing thin, scolded him for his wild behavior. "You're just no fun," he retorted. "Wild thing," she yelled. "I'll eat you up," he growled. "Go to your room," she commanded. Max, his shoulders slumping in defeat, turned and stomped towards his room. Max slammed the door shut. He threw himself onto his bed. Anger and frustration bubbled inside him. As he lay there, fuming, something strange began to happen. A tiny green shoot emerged from the floorboards beneath his bed. The walls sprouted vines, transforming his room into a wild jungle. Max, his anger forgotten, sat up in bed and stared. The room was no longer a room. It was a wild and vibrant forest. Max cautiously made his way through the forest, his bare feet sinking into the soft, mossy ground. The air was cool and damp, a welcome contrast to the stuffy confines of his room. Max felt a sense of exhilaration course through him. He had always dreamed of exploring a real forest. As Max ventured deeper into the forest, he heard the gentle lapping of water. A wide, sparkling river flowed through the heart of the forest. Max, his heart pounding with excitement, followed the course of the river. He soon came across a small wooden boat, painted a bright blue. What surprised Max most was the name painted on the bow of the boat. Max. Had the boat always been there, hidden in some secret corner of his room? Max, unable to resist the call of adventure, scrambled down the bank and hopped into the boat. He found a pair of oars tucked neatly under a thwart. Max gripped the oars and pushed off from the bank. The boat glided smoothly out into the current. Max, his heart soaring, adjusted the oars and began to row. He knew in his heart that this was no ordinary journey. The river wound its way through the heart of the forest. Max, dwarfed by the immensity of the forest, felt a thrill of excitement course through him. Strange and wonderful creatures watched Max from the riverbank. The air buzzed with the sound of unseen insects. The line between fantasy and reality blurred. Max, though a little afraid, felt strangely exhilarated. Days turned into nights as Max journeyed down the river. Max, guided by the stars and the flow of the river, kept rowing. He encountered creatures of all shapes and sizes on his journey. Max, far from being afraid, felt a strange kinship with these creatures. He would talk to them, sharing his hopes and dreams. He was free, truly free, for the first time in his life. As the days turned into weeks, Max began to hear whispers on the wind. They were the sounds of wild laughter, of monstrous roars. Max, far from being afraid, felt a surge of excitement. He had a feeling he was approaching his destination. An island, shrouded in mist, rose from the sea like a slumbering giant. He knew with a certainty that defied logic that he was meant to be there. The boat scraped against the shore, jolting Max back to reality. The island was unlike anything he'd ever seen before. Towering trees, their trunks thicker than any Max had ever imagined, stretched towards the sky. The air vibrated with the sound of unseen creatures. He cautiously stepped out of the boat, his bare feet sinking into the soft earth. He had arrived in the land of the wild things. A low growl, deep and guttural, broke the silence. Max, his heart pounding in his chest, spun around. The forest, moments ago alive with unseen creatures, was eerily still. And then they emerged from the shadows, their monstrous forms backlit by the setting sun. The wild things were even more enormous and terrifying than Max had imagined. He would face his fears and prove that he, Max, was the wildest thing of all. The wild things advanced, their movements a strange combination of grace and power. They circled him, growls echoing, hot breath washing over him. Max stood his ground, eyes locked on theirs. He refused to show fear, heart hammering. A massive wild thing stepped forward, eyes boring into Max's. Max glared back, trembling with defiance. The wild thing roared, shaking the island. Max stood firm, ears ringing. He roared back, all defiance. The wild thing paused, surprised. The others watched, amused and curious. Max had earned their respect. A low rumble of laughter rippled through the assembled wild things. Max, initially taken aback, couldn't help but grin. He had come to the land of the wild things expecting to be afraid, but here he was, laughing along with them. The large wild thing bent down, his massive head now level with Max's. "You," the wild thing rumbled, "are one of us. You are wild." Max, his heart swelling with pride, beamed at them. He had found his people. And so it was that Max was crowned the king of the wild things. Together they would rule this island of misfits. "Let the wild rumpus start!" Max roared, his voice echoing through the forest. And with a joyous shout, the wild things erupted in a frenzy of activity. They danced and stomped, their massive feet pounding the earth like thunder. They howled at the moon, their voices a chorus of wild abandon. They swung from the trees, their laughter echoing through the forest. Max, caught up in the energy of the moment, danced and sang along with them. He climbed onto the back of the largest wild thing, urging him to run faster, jump higher, roar louder. He joined in their games, chasing after them through the undergrowth, pelting them with strange and exotic fruits. He felt free, truly free for the first time in his life. Here, in this wild and wonderful place, he could be himself, without judgment, without restraint. The forest, once a place of shadows and secrets, was now alive with the sound of their laughter, the pounding of their feet, the joyous chaos of their wild rumpus. The trees swayed in time to their music, their leaves rustling like applause. The moon and stars peeking down through the canopy seemed to smile down on their revelry. For in this moment, on this island of misfits, there was only joy, only laughter, only the pure, unadulterated freedom of being wild. And Max, the boy who had once been banished to his room for being too wild, was at the heart of it all, leading the charge, embracing the chaos, reveling in the wildness that made him who he was. The wild things, eager to please their new king, prepared a feast fit for royalty. They gathered strange and exotic fruits from the tallest trees, their colors as vibrant as jewels. They plucked plump fish from the sparkling rivers, their scales shimmering like silver in the sunlight. They hunted down wild boar in the depths of the forest, their roars echoing through the trees. Max, his stomach rumbling with hunger, watched in amazement as they piled their bounty high on a giant banana leaf, transforming it into a makeshift table. The air filled with the tantalizing aromas of roasted meat, sweet fruit, and something else, something wild and earthy that Max couldn't quite place. It made his mouth water with anticipation. The wild things, their faces beaming with pride, gestured for Max to take his place at the head of the table. He sat down on a throne of woven vines, feeling a little overwhelmed by their attention, but mostly just incredibly hungry. He picked up a juicy mango, its skin soft and yielding beneath his fingers, and took a bite. The sweet, tangy juice burst into his mouth, its flavor unlike anything he had ever tasted before. He devoured the entire fruit in a matter of seconds, then reached for another and another until his stomach was full and his fingers were sticky with juice. He had never tasted food so delicious, so bursting with life and flavor. After the feast, the wild things, their bellies full and their spirits high, challenged Max to a series of games. They raced through the forest, their massive forms surprisingly agile as they dodged between trees and leaped over fallen logs. Max, his legs pumping furiously, struggled to keep up, but he refused to give up. He was their king, and he would not let them down. They wrestled on the soft earth, their laughter echoing through the trees as they tumbled and rolled, their massive limbs entangled. Max, despite his small size, fought with surprising ferocity, biting, scratching, and pulling fur until his opponents cried out for mercy. The wild things, far from being offended by his tenacity, roared with laughter, impressed by his fighting spirit. They played hide-and-seek amongst the giant trees, their shadows blending seamlessly with the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves. Max, his small size giving him an unexpected advantage, would disappear into the undergrowth, his heart pounding with excitement as he listened for the sound of his pursuers crashing through the forest. He would wait until the last possible moment, his breath held tight in his chest, before bursting from his hiding place with a triumphant shout, sending the wild things scattering in all directions. They would chase after him, their laughter echoing through the trees, their massive forms shaking the ground beneath their feet. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the island, the wild things gathered around Max, their eyes glowing with excitement. They had something special planned for their king, a nighttime adventure that would test his courage and push him to his limits. Max, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation, followed them deeper into the forest, the shadows growing longer and darker with every step. They led him to a clearing bathed in moonlight, where a giant bonfire blazed merrily, casting flickering shadows that danced and swirled around them. The air crackled with heat and energy, and the scent of burning wood filled Max's nostrils, both comforting and exhilarating. The wild things, their eyes gleaming in the firelight, began to chant, their voices low and guttural, their words a language Max didn't understand but felt in his bones. They danced around the fire, their movements wild and frenzied, their shadows leaping and contorting on the surrounding trees. The ground vibrated with the rhythm of their stomping feet, and the air throbbed with the energy of their wild dance. Max, caught up in the moment, his heart pounding in his chest, joined their dance, his body moving instinctively to the beat of the drums. He spun and twirled, his laughter echoing through the night, his fear forgotten as he surrendered to the wildness that burned within him. He felt a sense of belonging, of acceptance, that he had never experienced before. He was one of them, a wild thing among wild things, and in this moment there was nowhere else he would rather be. As the night wore on and the fire began to die down, a strange feeling crept over Max. The wild rumpus continued around him, the wild things still stomping and roaring, their energy seemingly boundless. But Max felt a shift within himself. The wildness that had thrilled him only hours before now felt overwhelming. He watched the wild things, their monstrous forms silhouetted against the dying embers of the fire, and a wave of loneliness washed over him. He missed his own home, his own room with its familiar sights and smells. He missed his mother, even her scolding voice and her insistence on him eating his vegetables. He realized that being wild was fun for a while, but it wasn't enough. He longed for the comfort of routine, the warmth of love, the feeling of safety and security that only home could provide. He had tasted true freedom, explored the wildest reaches of his imagination, and now he was ready to go back. He was ready to be Max again, not the king of the wild things, but simply himself. Max, his heart heavy, gathered the wild things. They sensed a change, their wild rumpus faltering. Max announced, "I have to go." The wild things groaned, their sadness mirroring Max's. He hugged the largest creature, then climbed into his boat. The wild things roared farewell as Max rowed away, leaving behind a place of wildness and love. As Max rowed away from the island, he looked back one last time at the land of the wild things. The sun was sinking below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange, purple, and gold. The journey back seemed shorter, as if the river was carrying him swiftly home. Max knew he could never fully return to the boy he was before, but he didn't want to. He had tasted true freedom, and it had changed him forever. As Max rowed further down the river, the trees thinned and the sunlight filtering through the leaves grew brighter. The air, no longer heavy with the scent of damp earth and exotic flowers, carried a new aroma, a scent that was both familiar and comforting. It was the smell of home, of warm cookies baking in the oven, of his mother's lavender-scented laundry detergent, of the slightly musty smell of his favorite storybook. Max's heart skipped a beat. He had almost forgotten the simple pleasures of his own world, the comforts he had once taken for granted. The thought of a warm bed, a loving embrace, a plate of his favorite cookies filled him with a longing that was both physical and emotional. He had faced his fears, explored the wildest reaches of his imagination, and now he was ready to return to the safety and security of home, a place where he was loved unconditionally, where his wildness was accepted, even celebrated, within the boundaries of love and understanding. As he rounded a bend in the river, the familiar sight of his room came into view. The forest had retreated, the trees and vines disappearing as if they had never been, leaving behind only a faint trace of their presence in the lingering scent of pine needles and damp earth. His boat, no longer bobbing on a magical river, rested on the floor, nestled amidst a scattering of leaves and twigs. The only evidence of his journey were the memories he carried within him, memories that would forever shape his view of the world and his place in it. Max climbed out of the boat and stood for a moment, his bare feet sinking into the soft carpet, his senses adjusting to the sights and sounds of his own world. The room was bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun, the air filled with the comforting sounds of his house settling around him. He could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the distant murmur of his parents' voices. He walked over to his bed, his legs a little wobbly from his long journey, and sat down on the edge of the mattress. He picked up his favorite stuffed animal, a worn and faded teddy bear he had had since he was a baby, and hugged it close. The familiar scent of home and love filled his senses, chasing away the last vestiges of the wildness that had clung to him. On his nightstand, next to a glass of milk, sat a plate piled high with warm chocolate chip cookies, his favorite. A note, written in his mother's familiar handwriting, rested against the plate. "Welcome home, my wild thing," it read. "I love you." Max picked up the note and reread the words, his heart swelling with a love that was both fierce and tender. He had journeyed to the land of the wild things, faced his fears, and discovered the true meaning of love and belonging. And now he was home, where he truly belonged, his heart full of the wildness he had found within himself and the love that awaited him always.